So for our side-side-side congruence postulate, we're going to start with segment AB is congruent to DE. So if segment AB is congruent to segment DE, that's one of our sides, and then segment BC is congruent to segment EF, and that's another side, and the third side, AC, is congruent to segment DF, then we can say the two triangles are congruent. That's enough information for that. Remember, order matters, so we're going to start with ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. All right, those of you at home, if you guys can copy this, and here we're on number 2, guys. We're skipping 1. So we're going to be proving that these two triangles on the right are congruent. We are given information, and with that information, we're going to create a 2-column proof. Where on one column, we state the statement, and on the other column, we give reasons for those statements. So we'll start with the first given information. It tells us that JL is congruent to MN. So we've got JL congruent to MN. The good news about proofs is that we've already been doing it. Now we're just putting it down or writing it down as a proof. So let's write down that part. We're going to say JL is congruent to MN. And how do we know that those two are congruent? Did we just guess? It's given. So we're going to write given. No guessing needed. It's given to us. Then we're going to look at the next part. K is the midpoint of JN and LM. So I'm going to make this my midpoint. And then we're going to also write it down. K is the midpoint of JN and LM. And how do we know that information? Did we just guess that K was the midpoint? That information is also given. All right, so now that's all the information they're giving us. So based off of that information, we're going to look at what other information we can get from the given one. So if we look at these two triangles and we look at this midpoint, what can we say about these two segments? They're equal. So this segment is going to be equal or is equal to that segment. So over here, we're going to write down JK, segment JK is congruent to segment KN. And how do we know that? Because of the midpoint. So we're going to say because of the definition of the midpoint, we can say that JK is congruent to KN. And on the reason, I'm going to just put definition of a midpoint. So let's look at the next part. Because K is also the midpoint of LM, then what can we say about these two segments? They're also congruent or equal. So we're going to do 3 tick marks to represent congruency. And then on my statement, I'm going to say LK is congruent to KM, segment KM. And we know that again because of the definition of the midpoint. All right, so notice how it's asking us to prove that those two triangles are congruent. So if we look at my two triangles, we know that this side is congruent to this side, its corresponding part. This side is congruent to its corresponding part, and this side is congruent to its corresponding part. So because all corresponding parts or sides are congruent, can we say that the triangles are congruent? Yes, in fact, we can because of this postulate. When we have two triangles that have the same congruent sides, then the two triangles are congruent. So notice on my last step, I'm going to write down what they're asking us to prove. And in fact, they are congruent because of the SSS postulate, which is my side, side, side. Any questions? Put your phones away, please. All right, let's go on to the next one. Now, if you recall, we had side angle side. And on this one, I do want to show you all what you guys see, that my two triangles, or that's enough information to say that my two triangles are also congruent. So when we have our two triangles, we have side AB congruent to side D. And notice how that angle that's coming next, angle B, is congruent to angle E, and it's touching that first side. And then we have the side BC congruent to EF. So we have our side, our included angle, and the other side. If those three are congruent, then the triangles are congruent, or we have enough information to say that the triangles are congruent. So we can say that ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Okay, we're going to do a proof. Those of you at home, if you can draw this. All right, so let's start our two-column proof. We have our statement column and our reason column. So let's start with our first statement. It says JM is congruent to segment LN. And how do we know that? What's the reason that we know that? It's given. Notice how on this next one, it's giving us, it's different the way they gave us the angle, right? So the angle, it gave us 3 points. And the only reason for that is because if you say angle M, we don't know if we're talking about this angle or if we're talking about this angle. So it needs to be specific about which angle we're talking about. So we've got JMN, which is this angle right here. And then we have angle LNM, which is this angle right here. So we've got angle JMN congruent to angle LNM. And we know that because it is given. All right, so that's all of the information that they give us. So let's look at our picture or our diagram. And what other information do we know? What can we safely say? Without a doubt, JL angles, this angle is congruent to this angle. How do we know? No, because you can have, let me show you. That's a good idea though. All right, so we say, don't write anything down, but let's say this is 30 degrees, this one's 30 degrees. This one could be 80 degrees. This one could be 60 degrees. And this one could be, oh, hold on. How is it that I got the numbers that I didn't want? Let's say this is also 30. This one could also be 30 degrees. And then this one would be 120. This one would be 70. Does that make sense? So those, we can't say that those two angles are congruent. No, Luis, I hope not. All right, what can we say about this triangle? Any of the parts. Take guesses, it's okay to be wrong. Okay, so I have two. First, I'm gonna do the one that's on chat. They said JN is congruent to ML. Do not write anything down yet. JN is congruent to ML. How do we know that? Went to what? It's not a mid-segment. Let me tell you why. But you're on the right track. Mid-segment is when you have a triangle and these two, this is congruent, right? So it's not a mid-segment. But MN, what is special about MN? Let's go back to what we talked about in the beginning. Do you guys remember this property? What did we say? Close your computer. Right, a side is congruent to itself. So we want to look for a side that is being shared. Now, if we look at this side or these two triangles, are they sharing a side? Yes. Yeah, so that one, there is no doubt at all that those two segments are congruent. They both share MN. So we can say MN from one triangle is congruent to MN from the other triangle because of what property? No, we can say that they're congruent to it themselves because of my reflexive property, right? So now we can say these two, this segment is congruent to itself. So this, we can say that they're equal to each other because of the reflexive property. So let's look back at our triangles. We have this side of this triangle congruent to this side of this triangle. We have this angle that's right next to it congruent to this angle that's also right next to it. And then we have this side of this triangle congruent to this side of this triangle. So now do we have enough information for us to say that those two triangles are congruent? Yes, because of what postulate? Our side, angle, side. So our last statement again, we go triangle JMN is congruent to triangle LNM because of the side, angle, side postulate. Side, angle, angle. So remember in the beginning of the year, we can't assume anything about any triangle. We can't assume it's a rectangle if they don't tell us it's a rectangle, or if we don't have enough information to tell us it's a rectangle. We can't assume it's a 90-degree angle unless they tell us any specific information to tell us that it's a right angle. We can't assume two triangles are congruent unless we have enough information to say that they are congruent. So we've already learned two of them. Two of the shortcuts to tell if triangles are congruent. Let's go ahead and this is the next part you guys don't have. We're going to determine if these two triangles are congruent. So go ahead and draw these. And on these, we're not going to prove them, but we are going to using a two-column proof, but we are going to use our knowledge on them to determine if they are congruent. All right. We've got two sides that are congruent. Is there any other information that we can say that we know for sure about these two triangles? Think of the beginning of the year when we learned vocabulary words. I'll give you guys a hint. Do you guys remember my Cleopatra? Yeah, vertical angles. What do we know about vertical angles? Right. Whatever angle is up here is going to be the same down here. Do you guys see a pair of vertical angles? Yeah, this angle right here is equal to that angle right there. So this angle is congruent to this angle. And we know that because of the vertical angles, the definition of vertical angles. All right, so here we go. This is the easy part. Ready? This side is congruent to this side of the other triangle. Then we have this angle congruent to this angle. And then this side is congruent to this side. Right. So we know that they are congruent because of what postulate? Perfect. So yes, they are congruent because we use the side, angle, side postulate. Any question? All right, let's look at the next one. Go ahead and draw those two. All right. Let's see if these two triangles are congruent. We've got, well, first, is there any other information that we can say for sure is true about these two triangles? Well, we already know that all the sides are congruent, but are there any angles that we can say are congruent? Not yet, right? Not with whatever information we have. So let's see. We've got this side is congruent to this side, and then the side next to it is also corresponding to the side next to that one. And then this side is also congruent to this side. So can we say that they're congruent? Yes. So yes, they are congruent because of the what postulate? Good, because of the side, side, side postulate. Any questions? All